Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
That is so fucked up. It's fucked up. So fucked up. It is just so damn fucked up. That's fucked up.
This is That's So Fucked Up, a podcast about cults, murder, and other fucked up stuff. Like really, really fucked up stuff. He cut off her nipples, tore out her heart, tied it to a rope, and hung it on the wall.
After spending 3 years really tapping into her divine feminine, she finds out she's divine masculine.
That's a mind fuck.
Yeah.
How much of a mind fuck is that? Fucking sharks ate Mark under the dinghy. After his dad dies, he fucking marries all his dad's wives.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes.
He, marries all his stepmoms.
There was this egg thing where you line up 7 or 8 guys side by side. They lay on their backs with their eyes closed, and whoever is the alpha in the room, they crack an egg into that person's mouth, and then they pass the egg mouth to mouth until they get to the end of the line, and then the last person has to swallow the egg.
Ugh. And they're naked? Did you say that?
It didn't say if they were naked.
Okay, I just feel like they
probably
are.
But they could be.
We're your hosts. I'm Ashley Richards.
And I'm Michelle Mosier.
Join us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
and everywhere you listen to podcasts.
That's fucked up.
Hey, this is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for children. It's a true crime show. I talk about murder, drugs, sex, rock and roll. Oh hell, who am I kidding? This show might not even be suitable for some adults either. I like to drop swear words, and some people are just not comfortable with that. And if you're one of those people, you've been warned. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors! You are listening to Beyond the Rainbow, true crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ, and I'm proudly partnered with Darkcast Network. If you get a minute, please check out my show notes, and I'll have a link to the Darkcast Network website. On the website, you can find a whole list of all the wonderful shows with our network. In 2007, for the very first time ever, the state of South Dakota was considering putting a woman on death row. And you're probably thinking, well, that's not very nice, South Dakota. But the woman was a confessed killer. All right, the confession took a little prodding, and she did try to wiggle her way out. But the detectives just weren't having it. As well, there was a ton of controversy over it because the woman was deaf. Prosecution argued that there shouldn't be special circumstances provided for this woman because she was deaf. And in the end, the court agreed. Regardless of whether she was a hearing human or not, she committed a heinous crime, and she took the life of another person. The woman's name is Daphne Wright, and she murdered 42-year-old Darlene Vandergeesen. And no victim shaming, but I did want to throw something out there just between us. Darlene claimed to be heterosexual. She dated men. But someone needs to tell that to my gaydar alarm. So I'm throwing 2 D names at you. Darlene, who was the victim, and Daphne, who was the murderer. Darlene, our victim, was a Leo. She was born July 23, 1963 in Osborne, Kansas. Darlene was also deaf. She moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota when she was 29 years old in 1992. When she arrived in Sioux Falls, she found work at JD's Trophy Shop, and she was employed there for 13 years. Darlene's parents still lived in Iowa, but they loved Darlene very much, and they worried about her quite a bit. But to be honest, once our kids turn 18, we don't stop worrying about them. Darlene was thoroughly devoted to her cats. She loved to play softball. She enjoyed going to something called Deaf Club. and I think that was where she was able to interact with other hearing impaired individuals. She loved camping and playing cards. Darlene collected Beanie Babies, and she was a member of Community Reformed Church. There was something somewhat risky that Darlene did, and it brought early gray hairs to her mom's head. Darlene was involved with online dating sites. Her mom was frightened that Darlene would meet a man on a dating site and he would take advantage of her vulnerability. As a mom, I think that's a very fair concern. Darlene had met a guy named Jeff online, and she was currently dating him. Our story really gets going in 2004 with Daphne and her girlfriend Sally. Sally was also deaf, and the couple were living together in Wisconsin. But Daphne really wanted to move back to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and that's just what the couple did. They moved in with a woman named Jackie in Sioux Falls. Jackie was actually Daphne's ex-girlfriend, and even though they were exes, they remained friends. Daphne and Sally lived with Jackie for several months, but Sally and Jackie, they just didn't like each other. This really put a strain on Sally's relationship with Daphne, and soon Sally would break up with Daphne. Sally was elated to find an apartment of her own. It was at a place that was lovingly termed the Deaf Apartments. It was called that because there was a large amount of the population that lived there that were deaf or hearing impaired. Sally had met Darlene at these deaf apartments, and the two women quickly bonded and became friends. Upon the discovery of Sally's newfound friendship with Darlene, Daphne, who was now Sally's ex, had become extremely jealous. And it didn't seem like Sally was really aware that there was a problem. Why should she feel bad making new friends? And her and Daphne were broken up, so if she wanted to see someone else, why couldn't she? There was no reason other than Daphne's insecurities. So Sally continued hanging out with Darlene. They were platonic friends. Daphne didn't think anything was platonic with Sally and Darlene. She felt like Darlene was intentionally trying to ruin her relationship with Sally, and any chance she might have to rekindle her relationship. Daphne was positive Darlene was trying to romance her way into Sally's life permanently, and she knew she had to do something to stop Darlene from interfering with her and Sally. One day at the end of January 2006, Darlene was over Sally's apartment hanging out with her friend. At that very same time, Daphne decided to pay Sally a visit. And when Daphne saw Darlene there at Sally's, she was heated. Daphne confronted Darlene. Daphne signed to her, "Why are you destroying our relationship?" And it was Sally who signed back, "Daphne, you are wrong." Daphne kept mean-mugging Darlene and gesturing in an aggressive way to Darlene. And Darlene, who had had enough by now, she stood up to leave. But not without using my favorite sign. She flipped the bird to Daphne on her way out. Daphne sat down and she refused to leave Sally's apartment. Sally went to a neighbor's and she called the police. It wasn't until the police came that Daphne would finally leave. And as she went through the door, she signed to Sally, "You will be very sorry." Back at her home at Jackie's house, Daphne decided to play some mind games with Darlene. She made a couple bogus email accounts that she would write to Darlene from. One of the made-up email accounts used the name Wendy Smith. Wendy wrote some very threatening letters to Darlene. The letters almost appeared written by a child with poor grammar and spelling, and they were all in capital letters like she was screaming. One such letter read, "Hello, Darlene. I want you to stop visiting the deaf apartments. You are a troublemaker. You are ugly and stupid. You are fatso. I hate you. You love to bother people at deaf apartment, bitch. Your sister is better than you. She is nice person. You are ugly person, and your feet bad like elephant. You leave me alone. You are fatso. And by the way, the U is the letter U and never spelled out Y-O-U. Several of these types of emails were sent to Darlene, all of them with the same type of undertones. Daphne finally even sent one as herself. She told Darlene she was Sally's lover and to please stay away from Sally. Several months of this went on, and finally Daphne and Darlene had seemed to mend their acquaintance. They were attempting to be friends, or at least Darlene thought they were. On February 1st, 2007, Daphne contacted Darlene and she asked her if she would meet her at a Pizza Hut because Daphne wanted help planning a Valentine's surprise for Sally, and Darlene said she'd be happy to help her. The following day, Darlene had missed work at the trophy shop, and that really wasn't her character at all, especially not to call and let them know she wouldn't be in. Darlene then missed the next day also. This really caused the trophy shop to worry about Darlene. They contacted her parents on her emergency card. Back in Iowa, her mom immediately hopped into the car and drove to Sioux Falls to check on Darlene. Not able to find any sign of Darlene anywhere, her mom filed a missing persons report. Later that day, Darlene's truck was found at the Pizza Hut parking lot. And with Darlene's mom's permission, Darlene's computer was seized and combed through. Detectives found some interesting emails Darlene had received from various senders. Their first step was to look up the IP address where these emails had came from. All of these IP addresses sent them to Jackie's home where Daphne was living. Both Jackie and her houseguest Daphne were asked by the police to go down to the station to be interviewed regarding Darlene's disappearance. The two women willingly went, but it was Daphne's interview that made the police very suspicious. She kept changing her stories. She also kept offering possible scenarios on what happened to Darlene, even blaming people she made up who had a beef with Darlene. And finally, Daphne admitted to the police she thought Sally was cheating on her with Darlene. For this reason, Daphne became the detectives' #1 suspect. Although the detectives knew they had other people on the list they had to examine. Detectives wanted to interview Jeff, the guy Darlene was dating, but when they went to talk to Jeff, he had vanished. His friend said it wasn't like Jeff to go anywhere for an extended period of time without mentioning it, but yet Jeff had been gone for days. Police started to wonder if Darlene was with him. Maybe they took a trip together. Darlene's mom said there's no way she'd go anywhere without letting her mom know. 4 days later, police were waiting in front of where Jeff lived. They were waiting for his arrival home, and when he pulled up, he was approached by the detectives. The detectives said Jeff seemed very nervous to them, but being questioned by the police has to be a little bit nerve-wracking. Jeff claimed that he hadn't seen Darlene in over a week. He was out of town. He had been visiting friends. He also showed general concern over Darlene being missing. A search was done of Jeff's vehicle. Crime scene investigators did find dried blood residue in Jeff's trunk, but that turned out to belong to a deer. Jeff's alibi was checked and it also panned out. With Jeff cleared, the focus on Daphne became even stronger. Now police had a search warrant issued for Jackie's home where Daphne was living. And this was partly because Jackie had told police she came home one day in time to see Daphne taking out some trash bags to the garbage, as well as some carpet that was down in her basement. Daphne's excuse to Jackie for why she was doing that is that she was clearing out the basement because that's where she wanted to start staying. The basement to the home turned out to be an evidence treasure chest. Patches of wall in the basement had been freshly painted with a royal blue color, and spots that looked like paint spills of the same blue color were on the floor. Inside the basement, there was a little room that once was used for coal storage to heat the old house. Some of this room was freshly painted royal blue, as well as the coal room floor, which was entirely painted blue. There was a wall in that room that was still black from the coal. That wall had bone fragments embedded into it. Outside, the police found in a garbage can next to the home a half-used bottle of chainsaw oil and a receipt from Ace Hardware. On that receipt was a chainsaw purchase that had been made. The detective's next step was to visit the Ace Hardware where the chainsaw purchase was made. They talked to a clerk at Ace Hardware, and that clerk remembered a hearing-impaired woman that fit Daphne's description. He said the woman came into the store a week prior. She handed him a note that said, "Tree cutting tool." He showed her the chainsaws, and she seemed pretty put off by the price, but she finally selected the cheapest saw. The chainsaw itself was not found at the home Daphne lived in. In fact, I don't think it was ever found. Still, detectives were certain that the chainsaw had everything to do with Darlene's disappearance. And what do you know? They were right. Daphne met with Darlene in the Pizza Hut parking lot. She encouraged Darlene back to her place on the ruse of the Valentine's Day plan for Sally. Daphne took Darlene down to the basement, and it's theorized she stabbed Darlene. She strangled her, and she hit her repeatedly with a blunt object. She then dismembered Darlene, and she burnt some of the pieces of Darlene's body. But most of Darlene's body parts were discovered in the Sioux Falls landfill. That's where residential trash is taken. Another part of Darlene's body was found by a road crew on the Minnesota border. Daphne was arrested. In court, Daphne's defense team presented her as having mild retardation, and I don't think that's a PC thing to say in today's world. Maybe learning delayed is a kinder assessment, but either way, Daphne knew how to manipulate Darlene into following her. She knew how to kill Darlene, and she knew how to dismember Darlene's body and dispose of it. But the important thing Daphne did not know was how to get away with it. As you all probably know, I'm not big on descriptions of lengthy court trials, and I don't plan to change my ways now. I will say Daphne was denied having special equipment for hearing-impaired people. It was something that might have allowed her to really understand what was going on and being said. They gave her a closed caption type thingy, but Daphne had a third-grade reading level, so most likely she didn't understand what was on the closed caption television. At trial, a jury found Daphne Wright guilty of first-degree murder. The judge spared her the death penalty. But because Daphne had been denied special equipment for her to understand what was going on, she had grounds to appeal her trial. And she did. With her appeal, she still didn't fare any better, and she's currently serving a life sentence in a women's prison in Pierre, South Dakota. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.